and welcome to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. I'm Karen McCarthy. Coming up this week, Transpower's plans for bigger buffer zones either side of its power lines, a necessary safeguard or a land grab of bigger concern than foreign ownership. School milk makes its comeback in a carton. Fonterra turns the clock back with an eye on the future with the launch of its Milk in Schools program. And why did the cow cross the road? The row over a new stock movement bylaw and the Fed's attempts to block its unwelcome introduction. In the studio this week, Wendy Clark, the Auckland President of Federated Farmers, thanks for coming in, and Malcolm Lumsden, Waikato dairy farmer and lobbyist. Power to the people. It's a Bay of Plenty issue just at the moment, but obviously has implications for farmers and landowners nationwide. Transpower wants to increase the buffer zones. What is the problem? Surely it's a safety issue, Wendy.
If Transpower manages to get into the district plan the right to take the easement without referring back to the landowner, A, it'll be a misuse of the district plan process, but B, it will mean that property rights have been taken from him without any negotiation, and this is going to have implications for upgrades or new lines. Because it's weakened the landowner's property rights.
What does it mean if, with that buffer zone in place? What are you, Malcolm, prevented from doing when they're in that buffer zone?
Well, effectively you can't build buildings, you can't do a lot of things that you would normally do. It's a freeze on your activities under that zone, and it's a 64-metre barrier which across a property is a substantial piece of land. I think the real issue is that the way they're going about it means that there will be no compensation to the farmer for the loss of those property rights. And frankly, that's a travesty of justice. If, for example, someone put a pylon on the back of someone's house in town, they'd be upset. But under this bylaw, as I understand, Wendy, they've got the right to do that if it's designated in the district plan, and because it's done under the Resource Management Act, there is no compensation.
Federated Farmers' concern is that Transpower seems to be doing the dirty here and trying to, as you say, use the district plan to increase these buffer zones, which it hasn't done before. That's
right, and it is interesting that under the negotiated easements, the buffer zone is not as wide. So it begs the question, why, when they're actually buying the property right, do they only ask for so many metres? And when they get it given to them, if they manage to get it given to them, why do they suddenly need the additional area?
Why do you think they need that much land? Why that size? As you say, it's a 64-metre strip. That's a heck of a lot of land.
Well, I don't think they do need it. I think they're just looking to the future and saying, here's our opportunity to get a grab without having to cough up for the effect we're having, and taking the nasty route, as I see it. I think it's quite a mischievous thing to do, and frankly, while everyone's worrying about overseas ownership, who knows where the ownership of that organisation is going to be in the future. It's a significant problem, and I think it hasn't had the air and publicity that it deserves.
Is it a compensation issue for the feds, Wendy? Is that the concern, or is it just trying to kind of get in through the back door, as you say, so that there's no need for compensation if this all goes through via the district plan?
Yeah, compensation is only just one issue. It's more a property rights issue, and the fact that they're misusing the Resource Management Act to acquire for commercial benefit somebody else's property rights.
Because Transpower farmers have been at loggerheads with Transpower for years over access and compensation. Is that what makes this different now, that just the way they're going about it?
It's a way that they're misusing the district plan process and the Resource Management Act for their own commercial benefit at the expense of private landowners and their property rights.
Previous to this, what has been the situation, that there's negotiation in each individual case if they want to put a pylon or lines on your property?
And the last resort has been to the Public Works Act, which sets out very clearly the property rights and the compensation process required. I tend to agree with Wendy. There are other issues other than compensation. We're using that as an emotive argument, I guess. But if you take someone's property rights and take away from them what they can normally traditionally do with that land to earn an income and utilise that land, then you're taking away a property right. And so therefore that diminishes the interest the farmer can have in that land.
Farmers have been out, I know, on the streets protesting about this already, Wendy, in the Franklin district, I think. Are they going to roll over, or are they going to take this all away?
I think they're going to take it all away because it's setting a precedent for right across the country. I believe that Transpower have intentions to go to other districts and make the same request about getting it enshrined in the district plan. What you have to understand is in the Bay of Plenty, there are no easement rights. The lines are historic, and so they never actually had an easement agreement. They didn't actually ever get any compensation. And suddenly Transpower have come in and they're trying to suddenly get something for nothing that we don't actually think is necessary. But the implications of it are that if there's an upgrade on those lines, where Transpower would then have to come back and renegotiate or negotiate for the first time in this instance and offer some compensation, they won't be able to. Because
what does this do to property values, I'm just wondering, if you've got this issue, especially for small property owners as well?
We're not talking about a handout. We're talking about you have to identify, under the Public Works Act in the past, you've had to identify a potential loss, and a loss of value of the property and a loss of an ability to earn income from that property. So we're not talking about money for nothing. And so if you take away those things, you go strike right to the core of property ownership in New Zealand. This issue will end up a government issue. If they're successful in getting this in the plan, then I believe that we elect a government to protect our property rights and uphold that as the law of the land. It raises some very interesting questions.
Wendy, how much is up to district councils to perhaps resist, to not let their district plan process be used or, as you say, misused?
Well, it's entirely up to the council, and we hope that the councils will reflect the community's wishes because that's what they're elected to do. But councils actually have to be alert to the fact that this is happening, and some of them, I suspect, are in danger of not understanding what it is they're actually giving away. They may think, well, it's reasonable to protect the lines, and therefore we'll put it into the plan.
Coming up, Back to the Future, the iconic Milk in Schools nutrition program makes a comeback in Northland with a nationwide rollout planned for next year. For the public good or a Fonterra marketing and PR exercise? Does it really matter if the kids are getting what's good for them? That's after the break with more Straight Talk. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. I'm Karen McCarthy, and we're back with Malcolm Lumsden and Wendy Clark. Talking bylaws, can I talk to you about the stock movement bylaw? Now, this is another biggie being introduced July the 1st if the Waikato District Council has its way. What's the problem? Why again have the feds taken issue with this? Again, is it not a safety issue, the safety of stock, farmers, motorists on our busy roads?
Well, it certainly is a safety issue, and if we... the last thing we would want is for any accidents to occur as a result of stock on roads. The reality is that stock on roads have the best record of any other road user, and in fact in the last 5 years there have been no accidents on record involving stock on roads in any part of Franklin, and only a couple of minor accidents involving the Waikato farmers. So what we're saying is that this bylaw is an overkill. There's a perfectly good bylaw operating in Franklin that is much more cost effective, and it has some conditions, and if you can comply with those conditions then you're allowed to move stock without the need for a permit or the need for an underpass. The bylaw's been passed now. There are parts of it that Federated Farmers believes are unreasonable or are illegal, and we are liaising with the Ministry of Transport at the moment to see if we can get those illegal and unreasonable parts of the bylaw disallowed.
How big a deal, Malcolm, is it? I mean, if you were faced with having to put in some sort of underpass, I mean, that must be a very expensive exercise.
Well, I know a farmer who's on a dead-end metal road. There were 2 houses on the dead-end side of the bypass. It will cost him between $100,000 and $140,000 to put in that bypass.
That's big money.
Well, it's ridiculous. Certainly bypasses on busy roads where there's a high traffic count are required. There's no disputing that. But I think what happened was the Waikato District Council ignored federated farmers, it ignored the submitters and just said, well, one size fits all. And quite frankly, it's ridiculous.
And so that example is a really, it's one of those examples that we're taking to the ministry and saying we believe that it is unreasonable to expect somebody to put an underpass in on a road that has very little traffic. But at the moment, the way that the bylaw reads, if they use if they use the road to cross in the greater part of the week, that means that they're up for an underpass. There's another example which we think is very unreasonable, whereby it's if you're moving dairy cows down an unsealed road, you need a permit, but it's perfectly all right to move a mob of bulls down that same road without the need for a permit.
What's the difference?
Exactly. Exactly. The difference is that we had a council who totally ignored their role as councillors to represent the community who elected them, and listened to a very partisan staff report and said, well, one rule fits all and that's it. It doesn't make sense, and I'm very, very disappointed that we've got to this point with what is basically a rural district council.
What about the cost of permits? Permits are free, so this is not a revenue gathering exercise, but it sounds like a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare.
It is a bureaucratic nightmare, and the original intention was to charge for permits on a cost recovery basis. Now, we would have thought that there wouldn't be too much cost involved in a permit, except that the way that they were planning to do it, where they had to come out and do an inspection at every site, and then the paperwork. They were actually going to cost out their time in the office.
As Wendy said too, when it comes to risk, you know, the records show there's very little in the way of accidents involving stock on the move. You've been in farming years, you haven't seen very much of that?
No. Yeah, farmers are very vulnerable. We're vulnerable to stock breakout and storms and things like that, and there have been an occasional tragic accident. But by and large, farmers have to weigh the risk up when they put stock on road, and I don't think they do it lightly. But where you've got metal roads that are dead-end roads that there's very low volume of traffic, what's the point? And it goes back to this one rule fits everything mentality. And I agree with Wendy that the danger is that they'll want to slip it in and then put in place a job creation and chargeback rule to cover themselves. Yeah.
In which case it does become a revenue gathering exercise.
Yep.
Let's talk about milk in schools. That's been a big one this week. Either of you remember free milk in schools from when you were kids?
We both do, don't we, Malcolm?
Yeah, sitting in the sun and going sour and then being made to drink it. Never drank milk since, I don't think.
Well, listen, hats off to Fonterra for this initiative, but what do you think? Is it really for the public good, or are we talking a brilliant PR exercise by the new chief executive? What do you think?
You have to remember that when you talk about Fonterra, you're talking about Malcolm and I, because Fonterra are just ordinary farming families. It's a cooperative, and ordinary farming families own Fonterra. So there has been a drop-off in domestic consumption. And I know that domestic consumption only means, 5% of all that we sell, but it's still important for us to for our consumption to be increasing. If it's a nutritional product, it's one that we should be encouraging people to drink rather than soft drinks. If we can get kids enjoying milk, they'll probably do that for the rest of their lives. So that actually does make marketing sense to me.
So you're right behind it?
I'm right behind it. I think it's a good move. I think there's some PR in it, and I think Wendy's hit the nail on the head. It's a health benefit that goes on. But just remember that while the executives of Fonterra are taking the credit for this, it comes out of the farmers' pockets. And so each of our 10,000 or so suppliers will be costing them several $1,000s a year, and it would be nice to be acknowledged.
Fonterra's taking all the glory, aren't they? And the thing is too, if the trial in Northland is a roaring success, they're looking at a nationwide rollout. I think they're talking about 14,500 primary schools. That's a lot of milk.
And
can you guys afford to foot that bill on your own?
Well, no one's asked me. and I think we need to be careful. There's been a lot of hoo-ha and crying over the price of milk. I think that, you know, if you look at where we are at the moment, no one's crying at the moment because the price on our international marketing is coming back. It was 4.5% last night, I think, or the night before. It was 9% before that. And so we need to be a bit careful. We're subject to world commodity prices, and I think that message is now being driven home. I don't think the farming community should be expected to provide milk for all the schools in New Zealand. I would hope that the wider public good would come in to back us up.
So what are you talking there about, government subsidy perhaps?
Well, even if the parents had to pay a small charge to provide it, I don't think that's unreasonable. But I think it would be unreasonable if Fonterra set out to provide milk to every child in the school. And I think before we do that, you'd have to say, what is this costing the individual farmer?
The dairy companies could maybe get on board with Fonterra.
Well, there is no other dairy companies supplying milk in New Zealand, really. We've got the Goodman group that's taking Fonterra milk, but this goes back to the RI and those proposals where Fonterra is also, at my expense, providing milk to these other foreign-owned companies to sell offshore. And so there's a circular argument there.
It's another issue altogether, isn't it? We'll have to go to a break, and after that we'll ask our guests what they want to get off their chests when it comes to burning issues on the rural scene. And too many dairy cows calls for cuts, regulation if necessary, to reduce stock numbers in sensitive parts of the country for the environment's sake. That's coming up next on Straight Talk. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. We're back with Malcolm Lumsden and Wendy Clark. And Wendy, hats off to Nick Smith this week, you said.
That's right. If I had to give a bouquet to somebody this week, it would be Nick Smith for having the courage to tackle local government reform. And Federated Farmers has been asking for this for many, many years. I never thought I'd actually see the day. It is great to hear him say that government is going to get local government to refocus their purpose and on the provision of core infrastructure, on public services and on their regulatory functions.
Why is that so important to people in the rural sector, this back to basics?
Because councils are out of control with their expenditure. So as time's gone on, since the 2002 Local Government Amendment Act, which sort of loosened the control on what councils could do, and maybe things were a little bit too controlled, but it's now gone the other way, and there was a particular provision in that act that says that councils have to look after the social, the cultural, the environmental and economic well-being of the people, and they have used that to branch off into all manner of areas. So now we have councils involved in big events like the V8s. We've got them involved in things like tourism promotion, which is really a private sector responsibility, and they're also interfering in a whole lot of things which as taxpayers we already get central government to deal with. So they're laudable things, but they're central government responsibilities. For example, the NCEA pass rates, the child abuse initiatives and greenhouse emission reduction targets, all of which Auckland think that that's actually, they'd like to duplicate. Well, Nick Smith is saying, and we're agreeing with him, that there should not be a duplication of roles in local government, and they should get back to their knitting, to their core services.
Malcolm, what's been on your mind?
Well, I think that Nick Smith's taken a courageous step. I'm more concerned about the governance structure. And for example, if you were applying to be a director of a company, you'd pass some scrutiny. If you were going to be a director of Fonterra, they have a mechanism where your credentials and your ability to do the job are checked. But any old Tom, Dick and Harry can stand for local government. And so I think there needs to be a voluntary program put in place whereby candidates could put themselves before an independent panel to see whether in fact they have the qualifications to be a councillor. And the public could then judge, but it has to be voluntary. Nick Smith has made some important governance changes, but I am concerned at the power he's granted the mayors, because the mayor has the power to appoint his deputy, to appoint the committees and do a whole lot of things. But if the mayor falls out of favour with the council, can a vote of no confidence by the council dispatch him? And I think that's going to be a critical question I'll be looking at, because we don't want a whole group of rogue mayors to come up. So positive changes, they need to behave like a board. They need to, the chief executive needs to be employed for the elected councillors and work for the councillors, not as it appears at the present that he worked for the council against the wishes of the councillors. So there's important changes there.
As Wendy said, at least it's a start, isn't it? And you didn't think you'd maybe see it, so that's got to be good. Just before we go, can we talk quickly about this? John Morgan in the Business Day this week talking about we have too many dairy cows in some parts of the country. Simple solution, he says, is for regional councils to regulate a reduction in cow numbers. Your thoughts, Malcolm?
They must be short of stories in Wellington. You know, if you're short of a story and you've got to get some copy, well, who's easy target? Farmers. And this guy's done it a couple of weeks in a row, and I just find it ridiculous, quite frankly. Armchair critic, looking for a story, get copy.
Does he have a point, Wendy?
There's no doubt about it. The dairy industry has an environmental footprint, just like any other land-based activity, including people. Given the dairy industry's importance to the New Zealand economy, I think we have a responsibility to be looking for solutions, not trying to downsize the dairy industry. And there's a whole lot of good things going on out there across the regions. When the management practices have changed so completely since I started dairy farming 30 years ago. In those days, stocking rates were low, but were those the outcomes that we would be seeking now? No, they're not. So it's not just about cow numbers, and there are a lot of things that individual farmers can be doing to minimise their footprint, and they are doing them. The majority of them, good, fertiliser practices, good cultivation practices, putting margins around the crops, so that there are buffer zones between the crops and the nutrient runoff and the streams, excluding stock from waterways, and many farmers have been doing that for many years. What people probably don't realise is that within the next 18 months it will be a condition of supply for Fonterra suppliers to exclude their stock from waterways. If you look across the regions, there's a whole lot of good public-private partnerships going on with communities, and in each case, so these, and I'm talking about these sensitive catchments, they've identified, the most sensitive catchment, and they're saying what's the problem in each of these, and they're all different. So here in Auckland, we've got the Maharangi management catchment management project, and the big problem was sediment runoff. So they have worked together as a community. So there's council involved and private landowners and other community groups, environmental groups and so on. So they're all working together.
I think Malcolm has made the point, hasn't he? On more than one occasion, farmers do actually give a damn.
We do.
Yeah, we do. And just an interesting anecdote, my stocking rate is exactly the same as it was in 1970. What has happened with cow numbers is that we have changed from different forms of farming into dairy, and that's where your cow numbers are coming in. There is not, well, the bottom line is farmers can only carry that stock that they can feed and care for properly. And so the limits are physical limits in the environment. And I think Wendy's absolutely right. I was certainly being negative about my comments, but I'm afraid from a farmer political point of view, we get sick of being bashed, and we'd like to see something more positive along the lines of what Wendy's saying being reflected by a columnist like that.
That's it for this week. Thanks for watching Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. A big thank you to my guests, Wendy Clark and Malcolm Lumsden. And thank you to you at home for watching. Check out the website for plenty of other great programs on our network. I'm Karen McCarthy. Catch you next week for more Straight Talk.